The first thing Ethan Cole noticed was the smell. Not the smoke, not the screaming. The smell, a specific chemical sharpness underneath the ordinary burn. The kind that told him the fuel line had already split open and was doing its quiet, patient work against the pavement. He had been walking Lily home from the library. Late October, past 8. The street was one of those long suburban stretches that had more streetlights than people, concrete and brown grass, and the occasional house with a porch light nobody ever turned off. Lily had her small hand wrapped around two of his fingers, the way she always did when she was tired, and she was telling him about a book she'd found about dolphins and how dolphins remembered faces for over 20 years, and Ethan was listening, really listening, the way he did to almost nothing else. Then the sound. Not a crash, more like the road itself folding. A deep crumple, the tearing of metal, glass going in multiple directions at once. Then silence for half a second. Then, fire. The sedan had rolled. It was sitting on its driver's side against the guardrail at the bottom of a shallow curve. Maybe 40 yards ahead. Dark blue, or it had been. The front end was already orange. Ethan stopped walking. He counted the people already stopped on the sidewalk. 7. 2 had their phones out. One woman had her hands over her mouth. A man in a gray jacket took 3 steps toward the car, and then stopped and didn't move again. Lily's grip on his fingers tightened. "Bo," she said, she still mixed languages sometimes. "The way she'd grown up, Dad. She's still in there." Ethan looked at her. Her face was calm, in the way children's faces are calm, when they're too focused to be frightened yet. "I know," he said. "Stay on the sidewalk. Don't move from this spot. I'll be right here." He handed her his jacket. He did the math in the 15 steps it took to reach the car. Fuel smell at that intensity. Fire at the front quarter panel. Tank positioned in the rear. He had somewhere between 90 seconds and 3 minutes before the heat reached something it couldn't be kept away from. The car was on its side, which meant the driver's window was now facing up, and the passenger window was against the pavement. One visible occupant through the starred glass, a woman, young, slumped against the seatbelt, not moving. He didn't break the window right away. He put his palm flat against the door first, read the heat, then positioned himself on the car's exposed underside and used his elbow on the corner of the glass where it was weakest. 3 hits. The window gave on the third. The smoke inside was thick but not yet black, which meant the interior fire hadn't started. He reached in past the seatbelt release, found it, hit it, used one arm to keep her from dropping straight down. She was lighter than he expected. Mid-20s, business clothes, a cut above her left temple that was bleeding steadily but not dangerously. He pulled her out in one motion. His left forearm passed through the edge of the door frame on the way out. He felt the pain and filed it away and kept moving. 22 steps back from the car, he laid her down on the shoulder of the road and checked her airway, found it clear, checked her pulse, found it steady and strong. He turned her on her side and stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. Then the fuel tank caught. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It was more like a sound that occupied all the space in your chest at once. A compression, a whitening of the air. The people on the sidewalk screamed. Ethan had already positioned himself low and sideways, and the heat passed over him in a wall. He stood. He looked at the woman on the ground. She was breathing. Behind him, Lily was exactly where he'd left her. He walked back to her. She looked at his arm. The burn mark was red and blistering below the elbow, and then looked at his face. She didn't cry. She just reached up and took his hand, the unblistered one. "Is she okay?" Lily asked. "She'll be okay. Are you okay?" Ethan looked back at the fire, now fully committed, now past saving anything. In the distance, sirens. Coming fast, but not fast enough to have mattered. "We should go," he said. He heard someone saying something about a hero, about someone calling the police, about staying to give a statement. He kept walking. Not running. He never ran from anything he didn't need to run from. Just walking. The way you walk when you know where you're going and you know it's somewhere else. Lily walked beside him. She didn't ask any more questions that night. But before she fell asleep, she looked at the ceiling of her small bedroom and said, "Dad, why didn't you want them to see you?" Ethan sat in the chair beside her bed, the way he always did, until she was asleep. He looked at the ceiling with her. "Sometimes it's better that way," he said. She considered that. "Okay," she said, and closed her eyes. The burn on his arm was second degree, in a strip about 4 inches long. He treated it himself at the kitchen sink, cold water, gauze, medical tape with the same methodical attention he gave to a fuse box or a carburetor that needed cleaning. He'd had worse. The skin would be tight and uncomfortable for about 10 days. He already knew how that felt. His shop was 3 blocks from the house, wedged between a laundromat and a former pizza place that had been a vaping store, and before that, a barber shop. The sign said Cole's Auto and Electrical, which was accurate if not inspiring. He opened at 7, closed at 5. Did everything himself because he couldn't afford to pay someone else, and because he preferred it that way. He was good at fixing things. He was, in fact, extraordinary at fixing things, though he'd spent years making sure that wasn't obvious. Lily went to school 2 blocks north. 2nd grade, Mrs. Hargrove. Class of 22 kids. She brought home drawings almost every day. They were on the refrigerator, the walls, a corkboard Ethan had mounted above her desk. She drew things she observed carefully: a fire hydrant she passed every morning, the particular way light came through the gap in the kitchen curtains at 4 in the afternoon, a cat that lived 3 doors down, that she had named Gerald, regardless of what its owners called it. She also drew Ethan, working, reading, sitting in that chair beside her bed. She had a habit of capturing him in stillness, her father, as a quiet thing in a room, present and not entirely readable. The morning after the fire, Ethan watched the local news over his coffee. He did this without particular interest. The television low, half listening while he made Lily's lunch. The story led the broadcast at 7. The victim has been identified as 24-year-old Sophie Hale, daughter of Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Strategic Partners, a private equity firm headquartered in... He turned the television off. Lily came downstairs in her jacket, backpack already on, her dark blonde hair still needing attention. She watched him turn off the TV. She sat down at the table and accepted her toast. "Was it about the fire?" she asked. "Yes." "Was she okay?" "She's in the hospital. Serious condition." He paused. "But she'll be okay." Lily ate her toast. She had that quality he'd noticed in her since she was very small, the ability to hold information carefully, like it was fragile, without making a performance of the holding. "Dad," she said, "you don't want them to find you." It wasn't a question. He looked at her. "It's complicated," he said. She nodded slowly. "Okay." He walked her to school. On the way back, passing the garage, he noticed something he filed away without reacting to outwardly. The slight displacement of the trash cans at the alley entrance. The angle was wrong, not wrong the way wind made it wrong, but wrong the way a person makes it wrong when they've stood somewhere they didn't intend to leave a mark. He'd taught himself years ago to catalog those small wrongnesses without staring at them. He went inside and opened the shop and got to work. He thought about the fuel line, the way it had split. He'd told himself on the walk home that a sedan rolling on a dry road on a gentle curve could do that kind of damage. Vehicles failed, metal fatigued, roads were deceptive. But he'd thought about it again at 2 in the morning when he couldn't sleep, and by morning he'd stopped believing it. He saw them from the kitchen window, not 1, 6, dark, identical, arranged with the efficient geometry of people who thought about perimeter. They came in from both ends of the street simultaneously, which meant they'd planned the approach, which meant they'd had the address for at least several hours, which meant the camera footage he'd assumed no one would examine had in fact been examined with considerable care. He stood at the window for 4 seconds. Then he went to Lily's room. She was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a book, and she looked up at him with an expression that was question and answer at the same time. "Stay up here," he said, "away from the windows." "Is it about last night?" "Yes." "Should I be scared?" He looked at her. "No," he said, and meant it. He went downstairs and stood in the middle of his living room. He didn't move anything, didn't adjust anything. He stood with his hands at his sides and waited. The knock was crisp, 3 raps, measured. He opened the door. The woman standing on his porch was approximately 50, which he read not from her face, which gave very little away, but from the way she held herself, the accumulation of authority that was too settled to be recent. She was in a charcoal coat, no jewelry except a watch. Behind her, 2 men in dark suits stood at a respectful distance. On the street, another 4. The drivers stayed in the vehicles. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're the man who pulled my daughter out of the car," she said. "Yes." Victoria Hale. Ethan Cole. She glanced, briefly and without obvious interest, at the peeling paint on his porch railing, the second-hand chair, the wind-bent wind chimes Lily had made from bottle caps and fishing line. Then she looked back at him with eyes that had been trained, or had trained themselves, to reveal nothing they didn't choose to reveal. "May I come in?" He stepped aside. She moved through his living room without touching anything, which he noticed. She sat in the one chair that faced the door, which he also noticed, not because it was threatening, but because it was instinctive. And instinct told you things about people. "Your daughter is upstairs?" she asked. "Yes. I'd prefer she stay there for now." "She'll stay," Ethan said, "because I asked her to. Not for any other reason." Victoria Hale looked at him steadily. Something moved in her expression, minor, brief, that might have been recalibration. "I'm not here to cause you problems," she said. "I didn't think you were. Sophie is in stable condition as of 6 this morning." She said it the way people who were very controlled said important things, with deliberate evenness, as if the control itself was a tribute to the weight of the fact. "The doctors say she'll recover. Fully, most likely." Ethan said nothing. "I watched the footage 3 times, Victoria said. "The camera on the opposite building. The one in the coffee shop parking lot." She paused. "The one inside my daughter's car." He kept his face still. "Most people who pull someone from a burning vehicle, even trained first responders, show a particular signature. Elevated heart rate is visible in the throat. The hands move inefficiently. The attention fractures." She looked at his left arm, at the bandaging visible below his sleeve. "You didn't fracture. I was lucky." "You weren't lucky," she said, without emphasis, the way you say a thing that doesn't require emphasis. "You calculated the angle of the vehicle, the distance from the tank, and the spread rate of the fire in approximately 15 seconds. Then you positioned yourself on the car in a way that minimized your exposure while maximizing your reach. Then you located the seatbelt release by touch in a smoke-filled interior in under 4 seconds. Ethan sat down on the couch. "Mr. Cole," Victoria said. "Who trained you?" The house was quiet. From upstairs, faintly, he could hear the small sounds of Lily doing her best to read, when she was actually listening to every word through the floor. "That was a long time ago," he said. "It doesn't appear to have been long enough to forget." He looked at her. "What do you actually want, Miss Hale?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the SUVs shifted position. Its engine, a low murmur through the walls. "I want to know," she said carefully, "whether the accident that nearly killed my daughter last night was actually an accident." She put an envelope on the coffee table between them. Ethan looked at it and didn't touch it. $20,000, Victoria said. "For what you did?" "No." She didn't look surprised. "Most people, I'm not most people." He said it without heat. "And you know that. Or you wouldn't be here with 6 vehicles and a question about whether the accident was actually an accident." She left the envelope on the table. She leaned back fractionally, the closest thing to relaxing he'd seen from her, and studied him. "The fuel line," she said, "on Sophie's car. What about it?" "The initial report says mechanical failure. The vehicle had 60,000 miles, moderate maintenance history. That can account for a fuel line failure," Ethan said. "It can," Victoria agreed. "But the failure point was clean. High, near the fitting. Not the kind of stress fracture you get from age. The kind you get from a cut." Ethan said nothing. "My head of security agrees with you," Victoria continued. "Or, rather, agrees with what you're not saying." She looked at him evenly. Sophie was not supposed to be in that car last night. She took my car, which was in the shop. Her own car was the backup. The only people who knew that were our household staff and 2 members of my executive team. The room was quiet. Through the window, the October light was gray and flat. The kind that flattened shadows and made distances uncertain. "You came here to ask me to help you," Ethan said. "I came here to assess whether you are capable of helping me." She paused. "You are. I'm an auto electrician. You're a man with tactical training, precise situational awareness, and enough discipline to walk away from a burning car without leaving your name. You've built a life that is specifically designed to be overlooked." She looked around the living room unhurriedly, with the attention of someone reading a document. "That takes a particular kind of intention." Ethan stood. He walked to the window and looked out at his street, at the SUVs that his neighbors were watching from behind curtains. The Delgado family across the street. Old Mrs. Patterson with her coffee cup. The kid from number 14 who was always outside with a basketball and was now very deliberately not looking at anything. "My daughter," he said, "is 6 years old. She walks to school 2 blocks from here. She knows her neighbors. She has friends." He turned. "I have nothing against you, Miss Hale. What happened to your daughter was real, and it was terrible, and I'm glad she's going to be okay. But I built this life specifically so that Lily never has to know anything about what I used to do." Victoria looked at him. "What did you used to do?" He didn't answer. She waited then. "Mr. Cole, someone tried to kill my daughter and came close to succeeding. They'll try again. I have security resources, yes, but they were already in place when this happened. Whatever is inside my organization is inside your organization," he said, "which is not my problem." The house was silent. From upstairs, not even the faint sounds of Lily moving. She was very still up there. "What would change your mind?" Victoria asked. He thought about the fuel line, the clean cut, the professional patience it required to cut a fuel line without cutting enough to cause an obvious leak before the car was in motion. He thought about the camera displacement at the alley behind his garage. "Sophie Hale wakes up," he said finally. "And tell her I'm glad she's okay." "That's enough." Victoria stood. She left the envelope on the table. "I'll let myself out." At the door, she paused. "The camera that filmed you last night, the one in my daughter's car, I've deleted that footage. You won't appear in any official record of this." He looked at her. "I also noted," she said, "that your left hand shows scarring consistent with a flash burn in the same location as what you received last night. This wasn't your first time pulling someone from a fire." She left. Ethan stood in the living room for a long moment after the door closed. Then he heard Lily on the stairs, not sneaking, just coming down in her ordinary quiet way. She sat on the bottom step and looked at him. "She seems smart," Lily said. "She is. Is her daughter going to be okay?" "Yes." Lily was quiet. Then, "Dad, someone did it on purpose. Didn't they?" "The fire." He looked at his daughter. 6 years old, 2nd grade. A girl who drew fire hydrants and ceiling light, and a cat named Gerald. A girl who read about dolphins, remembering faces. "I think so," he said. She nodded slowly. She came across the room and stood beside him, and looked out the window at the street where the SUVs were starting, one by one, to move. "Are we going to help?" she asked. He put his hand on her shoulder. "I haven't decided yet," he said. He hadn't decided, but his hands had already started working. That evening, while Lily did her homework at the kitchen table, he went out to the garage and stood over the workbench and thought, not the thinking you did with language, the other kind, the kind his instructors had called pattern reconstruction, the kind where you let pieces exist in the air around you and waited for gravity to do its work. He'd been 23 when he went in. Army first, then the selection pipeline that ended in 8 months of the kind of training that you don't put on a resume. Close protection, threat assessment, crisis management in environments with no clear authority structure. He'd been good at it, Not because he was the strongest or the fastest, there were always people stronger and faster, but because he had a quality that couldn't be trained into someone who didn't already have it. The ability to hold perfect stillness in the middle of disorder. He'd left after 6 years. The official story was voluntary separation. Clean record. Honorable. The real story was more specific, and he kept it in the place where he kept things he didn't need to revisit. He'd met Dana at a charity event in D.C., and Dana had been a landscape architect who liked bad horror movies and early morning runs, and who had looked at him, the real him, the version underneath the performance of ordinateness, and not been frightened. They'd married in the spring. He'd taken the mechanic work because he'd always had the gift for machines, and because it was the kind of work that existed outside of systems, outside of hierarchies, outside of anyone's list of interesting people. Lily had been born in the autumn. 3 years after that, Dana had been driving home on a rain-slicked overpass at 11 at night, and the driver coming toward her had crossed the line. He'd stood at the crash site after. Not weeping, he'd learned a long time ago that grief, for him, was a thing that lived somewhere below weeping. He'd stood there and read the road the way he'd been taught to read rooms and environments and threat vectors. He'd understood every physical fact of what had happened. That understanding hadn't helped. He'd taken Lily and come here. Chose the town because it was unremarkable, because it had a decent school district, because it had the kind of neighborhood where nobody asked too many questions about a man living quietly with his daughter. He built the business, built the life, built the walls, not dramatically, just steadily, the way you weather seal a house. And then a fuel line in a dark blue sedan had split with professional precision on a dry road on a gentle curve. And here he was, standing in his garage at 8 in the evening, thinking about pattern reconstruction. The problem with the cut fuel line wasn't just the cut itself. It was the patience. Someone had known enough about Sophie Hale's movements to wait for a night when she'd be in an unfamiliar vehicle on an unfamiliar route. That was either surveillance or inside information. Likely both. The operation was modest but competent. Not the work of someone who wanted to make a statement, but someone who wanted to make a removal that looked like bad luck. That narrowed the field significantly. He went back inside. He made dinner. He helped Lily with a worksheet about fractions. She was already ahead of her class in fractions, which he noticed with quiet satisfaction because it meant she was learning to see the relationship between parts and wholes, which was one of the more useful ways to think about almost anything. After she was asleep, he sat in his chair beside her bed for a while, watching her breathe in the way that parents watch children breathe, which is not really about the breathing. It is about the fact of it, the steady, ordinary, unmistakable fact. He thought about Dana. He did this sometimes, without wanting to, without resisting it. The particular way she'd laughed at herself when she made a wrong turn. The landscape plans she'd spread across the kitchen table. Pencil behind her ear. The fact that Lily had her eyes but his stillness, and Dana had found that combination fascinating from the very beginning. Then he went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and called the number on the card Victoria Hale had left on his coffee table, along with the envelope of cash. She answered on the second ring. It was 11:30. "I'm not taking money," Ethan said. "And Lily stays with me at all times." A pause. Agreed. "I need access to your personnel files for everyone with knowledge of Sophie's schedule." That's 17 people. Then 17 files. Another pause. "When can you start?" He looked at the ceiling. Somewhere above him, Lily was asleep, dreaming whatever she dreamed. "Tomorrow," he said. He started at the garage. His own garage, specifically because before he helped anyone else secure their perimeter, he needed to know whether his own had already been breached. He did it in the early morning, before he opened the shop, walking the alley and the side street with the unhurried attention of a man checking his property. To anyone watching, he was just a man in a work jacket with a cup of coffee, doing what men with garages did. What he found told him the threat was already aware of him. The trash can displacement he'd noticed 2 days before wasn't the only sign. There was a smear on the utility pipe at the back corner of the building, the kind you left when you braced yourself to look over a wall. There were fresh scrapes on the lock casing of the side door that hadn't been there the previous week. Not picks, just contact, the kind you made when you were checking whether a lock was worth picking. Someone had assessed his space and decided it wasn't a priority yet. Yet, He told Lily that morning that he'd be picking her up from school personally, every day, until further notice. She accepted this without visible concern, which either meant she trusted him completely or she'd already worked out more of the situation than he'd told her. Probably both. He went to the Hale corporate offices that afternoon. Victoria's head of security was a man named Paul Garrett. 50-something. Ex-federal. The kind of careful and competent professional that every organization like this one had. He was not threatened by Ethan, which Ethan noted with appreciation. He was also not reflexively deferential, which Ethan noted with more appreciation. "I've done my own review," Garrett said. They were in a conference room, just the two of them, away from anything connected to the building's network. Garrett had been thorough about that. 3 people had full access to Sophie's schedule that evening. 6 more had partial. The household staff knew about the car swap. How many of the 6 partial access people knew about both the schedule and the car swap? Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. 2. Then those are your starting points. He spent the rest of the afternoon going through what Garrett had assembled, not just personnel files, financial records, communication logs, the dry factual geography of each person's life for the past 18 months. He did it quietly, without commentary, asking Garrett 3 questions in the space of 2 hours. Garrett answered each one with the economy of a man who'd learned not to waste words on people who could handle information. There was a brief moment, around the 2nd hour, when Garrett offered coffee and Ethan accepted it, and they sat across from each other in a silence that was collaborative rather than uncomfortable. Garrett was the kind of man who recognized another kind of man, not with warmth necessarily, but with the particular respect of shared vocabulary. By 4 o'clock, Ethan had a candidate. He didn't say it aloud yet. He said, "I need to see the hospital." Sophie Hale was in a private room on the 4th floor of Street Clements Medical Center. Still unconscious, still breathing steadily on her own. Victoria was there when Ethan arrived. She didn't speak when he came in, just stood back and let him look. He read the room the way he always read rooms. Exits, sightlines, access points, the particular positioning of the nursing station relative to the corridor. The nurse who came in at 4:15 moved wrong. Not dramatically, just slightly. She positioned the medication cart 2 feet closer to the wall than was efficient, which meant she was either left-handed, and the majority of nurses weren't, or she was maintaining a specific angle to the window. She moved with the brisk competence of someone who'd practiced briskness, which was different from the real thing. Ethan stepped into the corridor and made a phone call. He gave Garrett a description, a room number, and a shift time. He said, "I'm not certain, but pull her credentials and verify independently." The call took 3 minutes. He went back in to find Victoria watching the door. "Well," she said, "there's a possible issue with your hospital security. Garrett's handling it." He looked at Sophie, pale, young, breathing. "There's also a vehicle that's been at the corner of this block since I arrived." Victoria turned to look at him. Blue Pontiac, 2-door plate, partially obscured by a dented bumper that looks too symmetrically placed to be accidental. He paused. "They know she's here, which means if they're watching the building, they're planning something. Not immediately, they'll wait for the right conditions." What conditions? A shift change. A power disruption. He looked at her. "Something that creates confusion. That's when these things usually happen." Victoria was very still. "When?" 3 days, he said. "Maybe 2. He moved Lily to the hospital routine with quiet efficiency. She did her homework in a family waiting area on the 3rd floor while he worked. She didn't complain. She brought her sketchbook and her dolphin book, and she sat in the plastic chair with her feet not quite reaching the floor, and she drew. She drew the nurse's station. She drew the water cooler in the corner. She drew the window and the parking garage visible through it. Once, she drew Sophie's door. Just the door, its shape and number, and the small pot of flowers on the table outside it that someone had placed with obvious care. She showed Ethan the drawing when she was done. She had someone who loves her, Lily said, meaning the flowers. Her mother. Lily looked at the drawing. "That's good," she said. He set up the security protocol with Garrett over the course of 48 hours. Not dramatic, no confrontations, no announcements. He changed the nursing assignments for Sophie's floor under the pretense of a staffing review. He identified 3 access points that were cosmetically secured but practically vulnerable and coordinated with hospital administration to address them, framing each request as a routine safety audit. He had a conversation with the blue Pontiac's license plate number that led, through channels Garrett had and Ethan knew how to use, to a rental agreement registered to a shell company with an address in Virginia. That told him enough. The operator was professional, patient, and resourced, not a freelancer. The nurse had been cleared. Her credentials were genuine, her positioning a habit from a back injury that made certain angles more comfortable. He noted this without embarrassment. A false read was data too. It told you how good the opposition was at using normalcy as cover. On the second evening, Victoria came to the waiting room to find Lily. Not Ethan Lily specifically. She sat down beside her, in one of the plastic chairs. Ethan watched from across the room. "What are you drawing?" Victoria asked. Lily held up the sketchbook. "A detailed rendering of the parking garage exterior." "That's very precise," Victoria said. "I like lines," Lily said. "Lines tell you what a thing actually is." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Do they? A drawing that's wrong in the lines is wrong in everything. But if you get the lines right, everything else can be a little off, and it still looks real." Victoria looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she looked across the room, at Ethan. He kept his expression neutral. "Your father," Victoria said to Lily, "is a very unusual person." "I know," Lily said, without looking up from her drawing. "Are you not curious about why he does what he does? The way he moves? The things he notices?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "I'm curious about everything," she said. "But Dad does things for reasons, and the reasons are usually good, so I don't always need to know what they are. I'll find out eventually." She paused. "He always explains things when I'm old enough to understand them." Victoria said nothing. "He explained about my mom that way," Lily said, matter-of-factly, still drawing, a little bit at a time. "So it wasn't all at once." Ethan looked at the window. Outside, the parking garage. Somewhere in that structure, he'd made sure to have 3 specific sight lines covered. He went back to work. It came on the second night, not the third. They'd cut the power to Street Clements at 11:47 p.m., not the entire building, which would have triggered immediate and overwhelming response, but a single circuit serving the 4th floor's non-emergency lighting and the secondary camera system. The hospital had backup generators, which kicked in within 12 seconds. The targeted circuit stayed dark. Ethan had been awake. He was always awake when he'd identified a window. He was in Sophie's room, in the chair in the corner. When the light shifted from fluorescent white to the amber warmth of backup power, he was already moving before the second shift. 3 men in the corridor. He'd expected 2. He adjusted. The first one came through the doorway with the controlled speed of someone expecting a sleeping patient and a night nurse. What he found instead was a forearm across his throat and a precise application of leverage that put him horizontal and silent in 1.4 seconds. The second man heard it not much, but enough, and changed his approach angle. Ethan had already changed his position. He processed the second man against the doorframe, efficiently. No more force than required. The third stayed in the corridor and made the decision to run, which was the correct decision and which Ethan allowed, because he'd already sent Garrett the room number and the direction, and Garrett had people at the stairwell. Lily was in the family lounge, 2 floors down, behind a locked door, with a charge nurse named Barbara who had been briefed, who had the calm of a woman who'd been briefed on serious things before and had decided that calm was the correct response. Ethan stood in the corridor. Around him, backup lighting, the distant sound of alert protocols beginning. The quiet of a hospital at midnight that is discovering it has a problem. He looked at the 2 men on the floor. One was unconscious. One was not. The conscious one was looking at Ethan with an expression that oscillated between professional assessment and something more primal. "You're going to tell my colleague everything," Ethan said. "Paul Garrett." He's on his way. He paused. Or you don't tell him anything and the outcome is the same. It just takes longer. The man said nothing. The operation already failed, Ethan said. You understand that, right? Whatever you were protecting by not talking, it's already exposed. The question now is just about your own situation. The man looked at the ceiling, after a moment. Harmon, one name, enough. Dennis Harmon was 48 years old, Chief Financial Officer of Hale Strategic Partners for 11 years. Architect of a financial diversion that had been running for 4 of those 11 years, and as of 3 days prior, a man whose carefully constructed position was about to be audited by an outside firm retained at Sophie's request. Sophie had found the discrepancy herself. Not through any formal review, she'd been doing her MBA coursework on capital allocation, and she'd pulled her mother's company's public filings as a study reference and found a pattern in the sub-fund distributions that didn't align with the stated allocation ratios. She'd told Harmon about it before she told her mother, because Harmon had been her mentor for 3 years, and because she'd assumed it was an error. That conversation had been on a Thursday. The accident had been the following Tuesday. Ethan assembled all of this in a conference room at Hale Strategic's offices at 8 in the morning, 4 days after the attack. He arranged the documents in a specific order. He placed the financial records, the communication logs, the timeline of Sophie's movements, the rental agreement, the 2 men from the hospital who were now, through Garrett's channels, in the custody of people with the proper authority, and he set it all in sequence on the table, like a sentence being composed word by word. He did this alone. He was good at alone. When Victoria came in, she stood at the door for a long moment, reading the table. Harmon was already there, because Garrett had explained that he was there to discuss the hospital incident, and Harmon had come because the alternative was worse. He was a tall man, handsome in the way of men who'd been handsome young and managed it carefully into middle age. He sat at the far end of the table with his hands flat on the surface. He looked at the table. He looked at Ethan. "You're the mechanic," he said. "The one from the accident." "Yes." "How did you get all of this?" He said it not with panic, but with the exhausted curiosity of a man who'd spent 4 years maintaining a fortress and was now watching it be mapped from the outside. "You left room for it," Ethan said. "The operation against Sophie was competent, but not exceptional. You used intermediaries who were cost-effective but not invisible. You made each individual step deniable, but you didn't think carefully enough about the pattern they made together." Victoria was standing at the end of the table nearest the door. She looked at Harmon the way you looked, at a thing you'd believed was one thing for a decade, and had discovered was something else entirely, without drama, without visible heat, with the careful attention of someone revising a fundamental document. 11 years, she said. "Victoria, don't." She said it quietly. "Don't." Harmon looked at the table. The sentence was complete. He had no answer to it. "I need to make some calls," Victoria said. "To Ethan, not to Harmon. There are people who need to be involved: the board, legal, the appropriate authorities." "I know," Ethan said. "You've given me everything I need. You had everything you needed. I just put it in order." She looked at him across the table. Something in her expression, not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude, something that was closer to recognition, the acknowledgement of a kind of skill that was rare enough that when you encountered it you couldn't quite look away. "You could have taken the money," she said. "The 20,000 in the envelope. You could have walked away from the door. Yes, you could have taken considerably more, once you understood what was in those files. Also yes, but you didn't." He looked at the documents on the table. The reconstructed pattern of a man's slow, patient betrayal. The fuel line. The hospital corridor at midnight. Lily in the third-floor lounge with Barbara, the charge nurse, drawing the water cooler in the window. "No," he said. "I didn't." Sophie woke on a Thursday. Not dramatically, she simply opened her eyes. The nurse called Victoria, who was there in 20 minutes. By the time she arrived, Sophie was sitting up slightly, accepting small sips of water, blinking at the afternoon light, with the slow recalibration of someone returning from a long distance. Her first coherent question, according to the nurse, was about the date. Her second was about her dog, a retriever named Mac, who was being cared for by a friend. Her third, asked quietly and without preamble, was, "Who pulled me out?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "His name is Ethan Cole. Is he all right?" "He's fine." Sophie was quiet. "I want to thank him." "I know," Victoria said. "We'll arrange that." Ethan was at the garage when Victoria called. He had a '98 Civic on the lift, with a fuse box that had developed an idiosyncratic short, and he was working through it with the methodical patience that fuse boxes required, following the circuit backward, from the symptom to its origin. "She's awake," Victoria said. "She asked about you." He set down his multimeter. Outside the open garage door, October had settled into something colder and grayer. The sky, the color of old concrete. "That's good," he said. "She'd like to meet you. When you're ready." A pause. "There's no obligation." "I know, Ethan." A longer pause. "I'd like to do something. Not a payment, not a transaction. Sophie's college fund, there's a trust that can be structured to redirect a portion to Playa. Lily's fine," he said. "The school she's in is decent. There's a program at Westfield that, Victoria." She stopped. "Lily's fine," he said again. "She has what she needs." Another silence. He could hear, faintly, the ambient sound of whatever room Victoria was, in the subtle mechanical breathing of a building with good HVAC and thick walls. "I have a position," Victoria said. "Head of corporate security. Paul Garrett is excellent, but he'd work with you without difficulty, I believe." "I know he would. The salary would, I know what it would be. And you're going to say no." "I'm going to say no." She was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his multimeter and looked at the fuse box. A number 8 fuse. Clean. Correctly rated. He moved to the next one. "You built this life carefully," Victoria said finally. "Yes. You built it so your daughter could walk to school 2 blocks away and know her neighbors and have a cat named Gerald," he said. A pause. "Gerald." He could hear something in her voice, small and involuntary, almost private. "I won't disrupt that. I know you won't. But you should know that if you ever need anything." "I know," he said. "Thank you, Victoria." He hung up. He found the short 6 fuses down from where he'd started a fault, in the insulation, where it pressed against a sharp edge, the kind of thing that took patience to find. He marked it, sourced the repair, and got to work. He picked up Lily at 3:15, the way he always did now. She came out of the school doors with her backpack and her sketchbook tucked under one arm. And when she saw him, she didn't run, she walked. The way she walked, with that unhurried quality she'd had since she was very small, as if she knew the distance between her and the thing she was walking toward, was always exactly right. "How was school?" he asked. "We learned about migration," she said. "Birds that fly the same route every year and always find the same place, even when things change." "Homing instinct," he said. "Mrs. Hargrove says it's not just instinct. It's memory and instinct together." She thought about this for a moment. "Dad, did Sophie wake up?" "This morning," Lily nodded. She shifted her sketchbook from one arm to the other. "Can I draw her something? For when we meet her?" "We don't have to meet her." "I know we don't have to." She looked up at him. "But I'd like to." He looked at her. At the way her hair caught the afternoon light. At the precision in her eyes that had been there since she was old enough to have precision. "Okay," he said. They walked home. Past the library. Past Gerald's house. The cat was on the porch, as usual, occupying the sunniest square of concrete with feline authority. Lily stopped to regard it for a moment. "Hi, Gerald," she said. The cat looked at her with the dignified indifference of a being that had decided acknowledgement was optional. They walked on. Past the laundromat. Past the former pizza place. Past Cole's Auto and Electrical, with its handmade sign and its one-bay door left open. Ethan's hands were clean now. He'd washed them before pickup, the way he always did. His left forearm still pulled slightly with the healing burn. At home, Lily went directly to her desk and opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. He stood in the doorway and watched her uncap her pencil. She drew a door. Room 412, 4th floor, Street Clements. The number, the frame, the pot of flowers outside it, with their particular stem angles and leaf shapes. She drew it with the patience and accuracy of a person who understood that the lines were everything. Across the bottom of the page, in her careful second-grade printing, she wrote, "Get better soon, from Lily and Dad." Ethan looked at it for a long moment. Then he went downstairs and made dinner. Pasta, the kind Lily liked, with the specific proportions of butter and garlic that she'd decided were the correct ones, and he'd faithfully replicated ever since. The kitchen filled with warmth and the ordinary smell of an ordinary evening. 3 days later, a car, not an SUV, just a plain sedan, stopped briefly in front of the house. It didn't park. It just stopped for a moment, idling. Through the window, Ethan could see Victoria in the passenger seat. She wasn't looking at the house, or rather, she was looking at it, but with the expression of someone watching a thing that they've decided to leave alone. The studied restraint of a person exercising a choice they've made deliberately. She looked at the lit kitchen window, the bottle cap wind chimes moving in the November air, the porch chair. Then the car pulled away. Lily came downstairs with her sketchbook. She sat at the kitchen table. "Who was that?" she asked. "Nobody," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Just someone making sure things were okay," he said. Lily considered this. She opened the sketchbook to a new page and began to draw. He watched her hand move steady, certain, following lines that only she could see until they were on the page and obvious to everyone. Outside, the November wind moved the bottle cap chimes. Gerald was probably on his porch, 3 doors down, occupying his square of cold concrete. The streetlights were coming on one by one, each a small ordinary brightness in the early dark. Ethan sat down across from his daughter. He watched her draw. The drawing she made that evening, she showed it to him before bed. A figure in a bright space, all lines and no detail, surrounded by fire that curved away from him instead of toward him. No face, just the shape of a person standing in the middle of something terrible. Completely still. Below it, in her second-grade printing, "Dad in the fire." Not scared. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about the fact that she'd gotten the proportions right, the figure, the fire, the space between them. Lines that were accurate to something she'd never seen directly but had understood from the inside. She'd read all of it. 6 years old, and she'd read all of it and filed it carefully, and now it was here on a page in pencil. He put it on the corkboard above her desk, in the corner, above the fire hydrant and the ceiling light and the cat named Gerald. Then he sat in his chair beside her bed and waited for her to fall asleep. The way he'd done every night since she was born. The way he intended to keep doing. For as long as she'd let him. Outside, the November wind worked through the bottle cap chimes, a small, irregular music. The kind you could only hear if the house was quiet and you were paying attention. He was always paying attention. That was the thing about him that couldn't be trained away, not the tactics, not the pattern recognition, not the capacity for stillness in disorder. Those were skills. But the attention itself was something older and simpler, something that had existed before any of it. The ability to be fully present in a room where someone you loved was sleeping. He sat with that. The wind moved, the chimes answered.